To our viewers, you're in the Situation Room. Happening now, a small plane slams into an office building, causing a huge fireball. Did the pilot's problems with the IRS lead to the crash? We're examining the apparent suicide note posted on the internet. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
It shot right across that light and right across the highway, went right into the building directly, exploded in a fireball. The fireball was probably 50 feet each side of the impact. It shook me. The people from the restaurant said it shook the whole building, I found out later. And then the windows began to fly out of the building. There must have been a lot of shock inside, the shock wave. The windows flew out, and there's pink insulation pads flying all around. You wouldn't imagine this. Then the Venetian blinds start to wave out. They go out with a shock wave. Then the fire started. It began curling up the first floor, went to the second floor. Then the fire guys arrived. They were here, it seemed like minutes.
We're following the breaking news this hour. The fiery crash of a small plane into an Austin, Texas office building housing offices of the IRS. An apparent suicide attack by the pilot who left behind what seems to be a suicide note on the internet. For more now, we're joined by Greg McCrary. He's a former FBI profiler. Greg, thanks very much for coming in.
You're welcome, Wolf.
Let me read this excerpt from this suicide note, this apparent suicide note. While very few working people would say they haven't had their fair share of taxes, as can I, in my lifetime I can say with a great degree of certainty that there has never been a politician cast a vote on any matter with the likes of me or my interests in mind, nor for that matter are they the least bit interested in me or anything I have to say. Assuming this is Joseph Stack, the pilot suspected of taking this plane and crashing it into this building housing IRS offices. What does it say to you? If you were still actively involved as a profiler for the FBI, what would you be starting to conclude?
I think when you look at the entire letter, and that's a relevant section, but if you look at all of it, I think the things that we tend to see is this sort of dangerous confluence of paranoia and depression. In other words, the world is a very threatening place. Everybody's out to get him. He certainly is fixated on the IRS. And then, to me, the real alarm bells come at the bottom of the letter toward the end, where he says that talks about violence as being the only way to handle this thing. Violence is the only way to handle this. And so it's a guy who has developed these suicidal ideations, has a constricted view of his options, and it now has reduced it down to violence being the only way to handle it. And that obviously is a very very disturbing place for this guy to be.
Let me read another little excerpt from this parent suicide note. I know I'm hardly the first one to decide I've had all I can stand. It has always been a myth that people have stopped dying for their freedom in this country, and it isn't limited to the blacks and poor immigrants. I know there have been countless before me, and there are sure to be many after, but I also know that by not adding my body to the count, I ensure nothing will change. I choose to not keep looking over my shoulder at Big Brother while he strips my carcass. I choose not to ignore what is going on around me. I choose not to pretend that business as usual won't continue. I have just had enough.
Absolutely. This is the constricted view of his options. He's had enough. There isn't anything more he can do. He's paranoid. Big Brother, he's looking over his shoulder at Big Brother. He just doesn't see any way out of this thing. So that's the issue, and I think more and more will come to light, as we know more about him and the situation. Obviously, he apparently set his house on fire before he went and did this. So this was one big suicidal event. So I think the other key thing is, though, keeping an eye out. I know earlier you had Fran Townsend on, and she talked about the potential of a copycat effect, and that's something I think we need to maybe talk about again just for a second. These things tend to come in clusters, and people who are mentally disturbed or on the edge tend to look at an event like this, and it pushes them over the edge. They tend to come in clusters. So I think we need to be sensitive to that. She also talked about TSA and Homeland Security getting ramped up. That's fine, but they're really probably not likely to prevent another incident with a deranged loner like this. It's going to come from us. By that I mean you and I and our fellow citizens who see people around us who are disturbed, and so forth. We need to not ignore them, but to pay attention to them. And if they're in a position where they think violence is the only answer, then it's time for further assessment and maybe some critical intervention.
Does it look like this was just the suicide that he wanted to kill himself and do it in a dramatic way, or was his intention to kill other folks at the same time?
Well, I certainly think he was intending to kill other folks. This is this homicidal, suicidal event. I think flying that plane into the building he intended to kill other people. And you see the irrationality of it, because another part of his letter, he talks about how bad it is. I think he's talking about the medical and insurance industry and killing tens of thousands of people, and he's outraged by that. But now he's going to go murder some people as well. So we see how irrational this individual really was.
And obviously, if in fact he put accelerant instead of just fuel in that small little Piper Dakota, that would clearly be designed to make this suicide of his not only a suicide, but as you say, a homicide.
Yes, very much so. I think even, especially if he did that, but even just the fact he flew this into an occupied building, and there's no doubt, I think it's obvious he knew what building it was and where he was going. This was really a victim-targeted crime, if you will. He targeted that building specifically, and certainly as the investigation unfolds, and we'll find out more about it, whether there's accelerants or other explosives or anything in that plane, that certainly would substantiate that idea.
Yeah, well, we don't know for sure yet. We're just speculating right now, but I'm sure the next several hours and days we'll know a whole lot more about what was in that plane, what was it in the plane, and who this individual was and what was he trying to achieve. Greg, thanks very much as usual.
You're very welcome.
Greg McCrary is a former criminologist.
U.S. law enforcement officials say they're investigating whether a small plane crash into an Internal Revenue Service building in Austin was an intentional act by the pilot. Police say it was an isolated incident and was not terrorism-related. One person is still unaccounted for and 2 people have been taken to hospital with burn injuries. The pilot had not filed a flight plan. Well, our correspondent Madeline Morris is in Washington for us. Madeline, what's the latest on this?
Well, they're investigating, authorities are investigating this, investigating whether it was an intentional crash, as you say. It happened a couple of hours ago now at 10 a.m. local time in Austin, Texas. A small plane, a Piper Cherokee, crashed into a 7-story office block, which does contain, as you said, the offices of the IRS, which is a tax service here in the United States. Witnesses reported a very large explosion. There were huge plumes of smoke. The fire officers went there immediately, and they've managed to get the blaze under control, but 2 people in hospital and 1 person still unaccounted for, as we know.
And any word on who might have done this?
The person who's being widely reported as being the pilot is a man named Joseph Andrew Stack. He is a local businessman in Austin. He had a plane registered to him. There were early reports that the plane may have been stolen, but the police were quick to say that that was not the case. Earlier, he left on the internet a long suicide note, about 7 pages long, rambling, talking about the IRS, how much he disliked the IRS, also making complaints against the Catholic Church. Now, that suicide note has since been taken down, and all that's on there now is a note saying it's been taken down in accordance to FBI instructions pending further investigation. So he is widely reported as the man behind it at the moment, but we do not have official confirmation of that at the moment.
Thanks, Madeline.